communication is vital, and parents might not understand that children know and see and hear everything and will make their own interpretations about it, and often that might be worse than the actual reality. So they need reassurance.
Welcome to Road to Resilience, a podcast of the Victorian Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. The Victorian Government acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the lands we've recorded on today. When we speak about coping with natural disasters, land management and resilience, there is no greater example than that set by the world's oldest living culture. I'm your host, Sophie Gunther-Vale, and this is Road to Resilience, the podcast where we unpack the journey to recovery after emergencies and disasters. I'd like to mention that we are going to be covering some heavy themes in today's episode that some listeners may find distressing. So there may be some moments where you want to step away or perhaps come back to us at another time. Today we're speaking with two specialists with decades of experience, including helping children and families in the Victorian community with their psychological and social wellbeing needs in order to help them recover from emergencies and other incidents. Jane Nursey is a clinical neuropsychologist with 35 years' experience working in trauma and disaster response, and has done research into the impacts of trauma in children. She's an expert in the neuropsychological impacts of trauma across the lifespan. Michelle Roberts is a psychologist, teacher and consultant who's worked in child mental health for more than 40 years. She has a particular focus and experience in supporting children, young people and families before, during and after disasters and emergencies. Jane and Michelle, thank you for joining us today for this important discussion.
Thank you.
Pleased to be here.
So, we might begin with some terminology to get everybody on the same page. For the purposes of our discussion, we're going to talk about emergencies and unexpected events. This might include something like a bushfire or flood, but it could also be some kind of disruption or failure where the event is out of our control. We're going to be talking about adults and children, but as we know, families come in all shapes and sizes. When we talk about children within a family, we're really looking at infants through to adolescence, acknowledging that kids have responded differently across the span of childhood. Can I ask both of you what the range of reactions might look like in a family? Are there any particular responses that we might see in children as distinct from adults, and is that something that can change over time? Jane, I'll start with you.
So I think it's really important to acknowledge that everyone will react differently no matter their age, and each person's response is likely to change over time as well. So how people respond in the initial hours following an emergency or disaster event might look very different to how they are responding some weeks down the track. What you'll often also see is that each family member will respond differently and have their own ways of responding or coping. And that can sometimes be difficult for families to manage and parents to manage. In children, particularly with young children, we'll see that their responses are linked very much to how well their parents are coping, and also what they've seen and what their own coping mechanisms are, or what they've seen and experienced and what their own coping mechanisms are. But responses can look like in young children, they might become quite anxious, they might be more irritable, have some sleeping difficulties, throw more tantrums. They might have some aggression in their skills. And in older children, you can certainly have some specific phobias developing, some anxieties, some general distress, can become quite withdrawn and non-communicative, or others might become very, very helpful and wanting to be doing everything to help others. Sometimes there can be feelings of guilt and shame associated with how they responded. Older adolescents and adults, again, you'll see the sleep issues. You can see somatic problems, pain, feeling sick, headaches, stomach aches, diarrhoea, and perhaps some signs of anxiety and mood disorders emerging, nightmares, those sorts of things.
Thanks, Jane, for flagging that. And over to you, Michelle.
Yeah, look, I'm really pleased that we're acknowledging individual differences of how they perceive the event. Some people might find an unexpected and challenging event exhilarating and exciting. Others might feel overwhelmed and distressed and upset. And the other thing that I was really pleased in your question was the acknowledgement of children, full stop, because for decades we haven't really stopped to think about the impact of these events on children. And as parents and carers, we tend to hope that we can shield our children from these very stressful and distressing events. The reality is that children are aware, either directly through their own experience or through observing what's going on around them. And more recently, we've started to even consider the impact on infants, and that the tiniest of babies are very well equipped to detect when there's stress and distress in those that are caring for them. Unfortunately for them, they can't take independent action, so they're left with feeling worried and scared and not sure what's going on. So across the lifespan, we do see differences. And I think when we're talking in terms of children, it's helpful to know that the developmental level of the child will influence what they understand about what's happening, what their needs are likely to be, and how we can best support them.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. And I think what I'm getting for both your answers, it's not about the family as a collective. We're really having to drill down into how the parents and carers responding, acknowledging that everybody responds differently. And then as well with the children, depending on their age, their life stage, their capabilities, what's happened to them, what they may be observing from their parents or carers. And it's about trying to frame the incident as well as you can as a parent, while also as an adult trying to deal with your own reaction as well.
I guess the one thing I just would add too is that disasters and those sorts of experiences are obviously quite stressful. And there is a distinction though between a stressful event and what might be a potentially traumatic event. And not everyone will experience the same event in the same way. So while it might be a stressful event for someone or not even a stressful event for someone, for others it might be quite a traumatic experience for them. And their reactions will be different according to how they experience it. And their trajectory of recovery might be different as well.
Can I ask you, Jane, what happens when we have multiple events? We know that climate change is impacting the frequency and the intensity of natural disasters. How might compounding incidents affect families?
What we do know is that, after each potentially traumatic event or significantly stressful event, there's a reaction to that and a recovery period after that. And if people are getting exposed to a repeated stressful, potentially traumatic events, their recovery from one event is likely to overlap with the trauma response to the next event. And over time, and we're seeing that in Victoria a lot, and in other parts of Australia where we're having frequent natural disasters, and those combine with things like COVID-19, the pandemic, and also family traumas and individual traumas themselves. So it's not unusual if we think about at least 70 or 75% of the population will experience a traumatic event by the time they're age 16, and most people experience trauma in their life, then we can see that it's not an unusual thing. So what we can see over time with people exposed to frequent traumatic events is a worsening and a slowing down of that recovery, and the potential risk for developing a more significant mental health problem is increased.
Michelle, would you like to add?
Yeah, so Jane, I'm also thinking in terms of some research from UNICEF and Royal Far West here in Australia that have identified that children born post-2020 will experience 4 times more disasters that are climate-related than those of us, myself and Jane, I think, in the 60s when we were born in 1960, way back then. We're much less likely to have had that frequency of exposure to those sorts of adversities. And I think we're talking about the event after event. I think need to think about the situations where within one event there can be multiple knocks. And if we think in terms of families, we're thinking about how much have you got left after each thing that you're being asked to respond to cope with, and how does that affect your parenting or your caring And what does that mean for how your child understands the world around them, the predictability and safety of that world? And does it prepare them better because they know that they need to gear up and be tough sometimes in difficult circumstances, or does it make them more vulnerable? And the research that I've looked at, it's not quite landed on which. It can be one way for some and one way for others.
Absolutely.
There was a research study done after the Black Saturday bushfires led by Lisa Gibbs at the School of Population and Global Health at Melbourne University, but in collaboration with a range of partners cross-sectorial, where they did follow families across time and individuals across time and look at the cumulative impacts. And like Michelle says, you can get different levels of responses. But for those who are, I guess, highly exposed or in the thick of things for a major traumatic event, if they continually are getting exposed to more and more stresses, then they are more likely to go on to develop more significant mental health issues.
I'm just reflecting on what Michelle said in terms of one emergency or one event can within that have so many compounding challenges, opportunities for sure, but it depends on what you have left in the tank. And if you're in the role of a parent or carer, there's already multiple things that you've got going on. You've got responsibility for children for the first thing, and then you might have damage to your house, you're going through insurance, or you may not be able to work and you're sort of dealing with the impacts of that. All of that, like I know we talk about this a lot, the mental load of it all can start draining your ability to cope and to support your children and at the same time.
And we know that in those major disasters, significant stressors like displacement, losing your home, losing your workplace, losing a family member or friend or community members, all of that is an additional stressor on top of the actual experience.
After the recent floods, a number of pre-teens, teenagers were speaking about the challenge of having to go to a different school.
Yes,
stand out in a different uniform or not have a uniform and feel like they weren't part of that community and were singled out and were seen as other, not part of that community. And I think when we would talk about what have been the really significant challenges of the floods, and it's the loss of community, the loss of the familiar, the loss of that was my home, that was my school, that's where my friends are and my support. We can rely on younger children, hopefully, getting support from their family. The upper primary school and early secondary and on, they have peer group that is important to them, and losing that is one of the support structures that's so important to them that can be so protective in the recovery process as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Thank you both. So moving on, can I ask you both, with your breadth of experience working with families, is there an example that stands out for you where you observed these kinds of impacts that we've been discussing? Might start with you again, Jane.
Yeah, so I guess the Black Saturdays fires for me, which were so significant and widespread across Victoria, I saw many families in that situation where those individual responses were really apparent. So you had fathers potentially off still fighting fires and moving rubbish and trying to help clean up areas. You had mothers trying to help the community and help look after their kids at the same time and scramble to find, they might have lost houses or lost possessions, scrambling to try and manage all of that. And you had young children who were, some young kids were quite mute and withdrawn and unable to engage and were quite tearful and sad. Teenagers who were quite disconnected and, again, not wanting to engage and quite sad and distressed. And you saw over time, slowly they would come together, but each of them in those initial periods are lost in their own distress and their own world. And families really needing to, and parents in particular, needing to work really hard to manage that and maintain the relationships within the family to manage recovery. I think in that too, the thing that came across to me, there were a number of students of schools that were lost, and the students being displaced and put into other schools where they felt very isolated and very alone. And that continued for a number of years, that while other people forgot, these kids were still very much caught up in it.
And over to you, Michelle.
These sort of events and the ripples are not only within layers within the community, and you picture throwing the pebble into a stream and you see the ripples. It ripples within individuals, it ripples within families, it ripples within community, workforces, and the whole of Victoria really at the moment. And within families there's different relationships. There's brother-sister relationships, there's mother-father relationships, there's carers, there's aunties, uncles, you know, all those permeations of what a family can be. And you have to also be able to understand what are the dynamics within this family. How does it work? So that then you can support them in the way that works for them. Trust in the world and other people is really shattered for a period of time for those families. So being able to support them and gently encourage them to trust again is an important part of the work that we do. So we look to support and match the need as best we can.
We're all aware of the advice of on an aircraft you put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others, even children. After an incident like an emergency or any other potentially traumatic event, is it a case of adults needing to manage our own reactions and mental health first? And what are some practical steps we can sort of give to someone who's an adult in a family dynamic?
Yeah, so look, it is absolutely that, although the very first phase of response, I guess, needs to be making sure that everybody's safe and doing what needs to be done to do that. But yes, as a parent and as adults, it's really important, very difficult at times, but really important to take a step back and really think about how's this impacted me? What am I feeling? What am I feeling physically? What am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling psychologically? Because we often think that we're invincible and think, well, you know, I'm going to be fine. And if you've had specific training to deal with difficult situations, then you're more likely to dismiss the fact that it's had an impact. But the reality is these sorts of events do impact you. And often you won't perhaps see it in yourself. So it's really important to take that time, take a breath, calm yourself down so that you're more able to then support the people around you and the people that you care for. And that might be as simple as doing things like controlled breathing, you know, the idea of watching your breathing, because often when we're highly stressed or traumatised by something, then our breathing will become faster, shallower. That'll change the oxygenation level within our blood. That will create feelings of physical distress and emotional distress. So by just bringing our breathing under control, we can immediately bring some calmness down and give our headspace some time to think through what do I need to do and what's my next steps. Then it's time to think about the kids. It's an ongoing thing. You have to be monitoring how you're going. We know that social connectedness with others, connecting with others, speaking with others is the most powerful thing for recovery. Again, some people tend to isolate themselves. That's likely to lead to worse feelings, more anxious feelings, more distressed feelings. So connecting with others, talking with them about what's going on, and just doing some self-care is going to put you in a better position to manage your own responses and help the people around you.
Wonderful. And Michelle, would you like to add your own response there?
Yeah, I think it's a lovely concept that we put our mask on first and we get ourselves grounded and coping first. The reality is that you can't step away from your children while you do that it's all happening at the same time. And to be kind to ourselves, I think we need to acknowledge that we're being the best we can in the circumstances. So, yes, we put our mask on, but it's only to put that oxygen mask on to be able to do the next step, which is to take care of ourselves and those that we care for and to function as best we can in the circumstances. And Jane's point about connection being helpful, if you've only got your own voice in your head about how you're travelling, are you doing well or not, you may miss the fact that you're much snappier, you're crosser, you're smacking your kids, and that was never part of how you wanted to be a parent. I often have parents feeling very guilty and shamed about this event that happened. It was my choice to live in the bush and look what it's meant for my children, that sort of guilt. Or I was hysterical and I was running around the house screaming, we're all going to die. And have I harmed my children forever, Michelle, they'll say, And to be fair to us as parents and carers, we do the best we can.
Yes.
And we can repair. We can change things. We can say, boy, I really lost it, didn't I? I got really frightened. But then I remembered what Jane said about, what's my breathing doing? Oh, it's really fast and shallow, and that's not good for my brain. It's not helping me to think.
Guilt and shame has come up a little bit today, and not that I'm surprised, but it's interesting that for me it's become a bit of a theme of today's conversation. And I guess when you're thinking about guilt and shame, what we're saying is you need to be kinder. Reducing those feelings of guilt and shame actually could improve your end outcome and then the outcomes for then your family.
Absolutely. And, guilt and shame do go hand in hand with stressful traumatic events, because we're also always second-guessing our responses and what we're doing and how we're impacting others.
We spoke about the if only I hadn't, if only.
Yeah, that's right. But they're also things that, go hand in hand with experiencing something that's so overwhelming. If they're there in our heads and we're not bouncing off what we're thinking to somebody else, then they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, it's really important to, when you're feeling comfortable and if you have someone you can find to chat about those sorts of things, it's going to be really helpful to put things in perspective. And
so, Jane, I think guilt and shame often goes hand in hand with anger. They're the three strong emotions that people don't seem to feel comfortable with or readily accept as part of the response, and it's what we see all the time.
So we know that children have different needs to adults. We've sort of addressed that a little bit in the discussion. What I'd like to do is get into the actions that we know work well to support children over time. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. Could you tell us some immediate actions that we could take to help children through some stressful times?
Let's say we're talking about when everyone's physically safe. So you're not in the moment, you're just after the moment. And the sorts of things that I know are helpful to children in that period of time after a disaster or an unexpected event is that they think they're safe, they feel they're safe, and they are safe, and that the event has finished at that point. And it takes a trusted adult for them to understand that that's the situation. You can say it's okay, it's over, you're safe, and they may think, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. That's not true. I think that then the next step is knowing your child or how that child best responds. Some kids would like a cuddle, some would hate a cuddle. Some would like a lot of noise, some would like no noise. And so, again, I come back to the term I used earlier about matching the need. So children need, in those times, a trusted adult that can tell them that they're safe and they believe it, to understand what's happened. Parents often feel very anxious to say what's happened because they think they're re-traumatising, re-triggering or doing further harm. I think as parents we almost hope that our kids are unaware, which is ludicrous, of course, because they do know, but it's like it's too hard as an adult to think that the child's been exposed to such a horror, such a difficult situation. So we avoid the topic. But in fact, the kids come to me and say, no one will talk with me about that. I saw this and they didn't see it, and I know this happened and they don't know that happened, and I want them to know what I experienced about it. So being able to have a comfortable conversation around what happened, how our family coped, what our family's going to do next, what was really scary, and it'll be different for each person, and what do you need now, what's most helpful. So it's really about harnessing the strengths and what works for that child and being conscious as a carer or a parent of using those strategies. And with little children in particular, but also older children, they will need to keep checking in. You know, they might be so frightened that they shut down. Little babies often just come into their own world and they're not looking to be attached and to be held and to be soothed, or they might only want to be held, you know, and you often hear parents say, I can't get her off my leg anymore. She's always hanging on to my trousers, you know, and that's I need that anchor point. I need to feel reassured that you're here and you're going to keep me safe and everything's going to be okay. With our young people, I said before about the importance of the peer group there, but they also need to check in. And I know after the Black Summer fires, a lot of the young people were coming to talk to their school counsellors or their headspace counsellors, and they were saying, I'm not going to deal with my stuff until I know mum and dad are okay. I'm coming to tell you I'm really worried about dad. You know, he's down in that shed more often than he should, and I don't know what he's doing down there, but I don't feel good about it. And when I know mum and dad are okay, then I'll tell you my story. So we know that as kids get older, they feel a sense of responsibility and protectiveness of their parents, and it also means that they don't actually tell their parents the depth of their distress because they're not wanting to trigger and upset their parents further. So we get this dance that's really not a helpful dance. You know, the open conversations, the curious and open questions that you spoke about really give families a chance to explore this unusual, perhaps never experienced before event and collectively support each other in the journey.
That's wonderful. Jane, would you like to add anything in there?
Yeah, look, I think that last point is a really important point. In that kids will often take on that sense of responsibility and wanting to take care of the family. And along with that, they might also have a sense that something that they've done has caused this, or they're responsible for mum and dad being unhappy and distressed. So that communication is vital, and parents might not understand that children know and see and hear everything and will make their own interpretations about it, and often that might be worse than the actual reality. So they need reassurance. But also the parents' own fear about not wanting to talk about it and not wanting to cause more distress in their children can override their willingness to sit down with their child and have those conversations. So I think it's really important that, you know, that again there's that reflection and that knowing that sitting down and chatting, letting the child lead the conversation about what they're feeling, what's on their mind, what are they worried about, what's going to make them feel better is really important.
To add to that, I think one of the terms that we hear time and time again, and it always makes me twitchy because we say, oh, well, children are resilient. And in saying that, some people think we don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
You know, they just have this natural, innate ability
They'll bounce
to
back.
move forward with this. So everyone's resilient with the right support.
Yes.
You know, and children aren't excluded from that, and babies aren't excluded from that, and young people aren't excluded from that. So it really is a chance to remind ourselves of what helps us when we're struggling, how we can support each other, what we need to do to look after ourselves and others, and how we can ask for assistance when we need it.
Just as a follow-on, sort of when we start to move into a longer term, how do you think those supports may need to change, and what else might parents need to consider?
Longer term for me is acknowledging that there are different ways of recovering. We know that there are some people who go very well in the short term, medium term, and then it catches up with them. We know there are people that are very distressed and fragile and struggling in the early phases, and then think about all their coping strategies, get the supports they need and go on. And then there's the people that are up and down, and then there's the people who are resistant, unaffected. You know, there's a lot of variations in the trajectories that we see, not just in adults but also in children. And so sometimes parents say to me, she's doing okay, she's outside playing, it's like nothing ever happened. And then the child goes to school, or there's a transition point, you know, from primary to secondary or whatever, and they say she's just fallen apart and we don't know why. Or he's so naughty, he's really, you know, hard to manage now. And you have to go back and say, was there something previously that might account for this? Oh, well, we're in the fires. Do you think it might be that? Well, yes, it could be. So holding in mind that longer term, you might start to see for the first time indicators that that child's struggling with what happened, or that family has run out of all their coping resources and now they're conflictual and there's family violence happening and the money resources have run out, as well as the social and emotional resources. Those things can be medium to long term, and we need to keep a watch out for them and an awareness of them.
It will change over time, and for each individual, they will have different needs at different times. And so the overwhelming point is keep monitoring, keep asking, keep checking in with yourself, keep checking in with your kids, keep checking in with colleagues and friends and that sort of thing. Because it's not a few weeks or a few months. It's a significant event that's going to impact you in an ongoing way. And anniversaries will come every year, and they're likely to be difficult times for most people. And so needing to take a closer look at how you're coping and what's going on for the members of the family, and providing some extra supports at that time. Let's go and do something fun together. Let's go and mark it in some way. The other thing I think is really important is that point about anger and the ongoing financial stressors and other stresses that might be there following some sort of event. And, we talk about recovery capitals, there's human, there's land, there's social, there's financial, there's whatever. And I think you don't need to talk about them in those terms, but it is about, thinking about what are the other stressors in my life that might be leading to some ongoing difficulties or infecting one member of the family over another,
To have hope for children is really important, and especially important because they don't have the benefit of having had the years of life experience that the adults have had. So looking back for them on what worked before, or what was life like before this and what's it going to be like when we move through this, is really not as easy. And it's something that as adults we can do
to support
is
kids.
to say this time will pass. And you think about a 3-year-old's concept of time, compared to a 23-year-old's concept of time or a 70-year-old's concept of time. They're all very different, and I think that it's an adult responsibility in some ways to say things will change. This isn't going to be how it is forever. We will get out of the tent. We will get out of the caravan. We will, get back to our community or move somewhere else or whatever. That's right. So it's a useful thing for parents to hold in mind, that they might need to keep on saying, we'll get there. We're going to get there.
And I think their own capacity to contribute to writing that journey. Even very young children have good ideas that they can contribute to building that plan of recovery and what they can do as a family to help each other and support each other. And involving them in that is vital to their recovery, really. Leaving them out of that actually can be quite problematic.
It's another
for
example
them.
of how they can't make a difference in the world. The world's out of their control. And that sense of making a difference and having control is so important to our sense of self and our ability to affect change for the best for ourselves. So I'm really glad that you raised that.
Traumatic events make you feel powerless, and they make you feel like you have no control. So anything that can be done to engender that sense of I am powerful, I have got control over something, I can do something, is really important.
Potentially we may have listeners who haven't experienced an emergency or an incident such as what we've been discussing today, but they may actually be responsible for caring for other families or other members of their community. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on the role of community. If you're in that position, what you can do to support recovery. And Michelle, I might start with you.
I think also community's good at having get-togethers, the sausage sizzle, the footy club, we spoke earlier again about the kids that go to a school where no one else has come from the circumstance, the bushfires, and so there's not a group that they have a shared experience with. So making sure that there's opportunity to link in with others who have similar experiences. I've done some work with preschool educators, and they create the connection for the affected families of shared experience of whatever the adversity was. They come together. They come together for a coffee morning or a cup of tea morning, and there's opportunity to say, how's your 2-year-old doing? Is she still talking about the accident? My 2-year-old's still dreaming. Is yours still dreaming about it? So that you get a measure of what's happening, what other people are doing, what's working for them, because it might work for you. They can be a shoulder, they can be a fresh set of ears, they can just be a confidant in the circumstance. And not to forget the need of children for that social connection, that broader group to engage with, a different set of ears to tell the story or to play the story or to draw the story with.
Thank you, Michelle. Jane, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, look, I think just emphasise that, social connected is that the fifth of those main principles I was talking about, and it is fundamental to recovery and across the lifespan from infancy to the very aged. We're human beings. Connectedness is really vital to our well-being. So the community can play a really important role in providing that connectedness and that support. But I think the other thing is to be good listeners. It's not about you going in and solving the problems for everyone or a individual in particular. It's about being there and being able to listen. You don't even have to say anything. It's being an active listener, making sure that the person is being heard. That's the most powerful thing that you can do.
So active listening in child language is whole body listening, and early childhood centres and schools often talk about whole body listening, and it's orienting your body to the person who's talking. It's staying engaged, using your eyes, using your ears and so on. And being heard is so important when something enormous has happened in your life. And it's the same for adults and children. So even for a 3-year-old who wants to show you their interpretive dance of what happened to them, or their picture that shows them in the moment when the fire was coming, how they went to get their soft toy to put in the to-go bag or whatever they did, it's acknowledging and validating, another catchphrase to remember. Yes, I know that was a really tough time for you, and I can see how hard you're working to get through this. What can I do to help?
Before I let you go, I would like to offer you the opportunity for any last thoughts, any comments, anything you wanted to come back to before we wrap up.
Look, from me, I think, we've focused a lot on the negatives. I do want to reassure people that, reactions are a normal part of going through some of these events. It's a normal thing, and for most people, with the support of others and family and that sort of thing, those signs and issues will disappear in a relatively short period of time. Most people are resilient, but there will be a percentage of the population that do go on to develop issues, and seeking help early is really important. There's a wealth of strategies out there online, apps, websites, and just your friends and family. So go and chat.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I have nothing to add. That was perfect.
Oh, well done. Thank you both. So for those listening, just a reminder, as we've mentioned, there are some really useful resources that we've included in the show notes for you. I think this conversation has provided hope in what can sometimes feel like heavy times. I'm Sophie Gunther-Vale. Thank you for listening.